Tap into the minds of the innovators and the Mavericks who challenge the status quo with new ideas, systems, and solutions. Welcome to Innovation Mavericks.
Welcome to Innovation Mavericks. I'm excited today to have Rush Garner with me. Rush, thanks for joining us. Appreciating your busy schedule here. Rush is the owner of Rush Wine Cellars and has an incredible story to tell. And today I just want him to share some insight on how you got here, because all the time people will say to us, I want to own a business. I want to start a business.
Right.
I'm really trying to find my career path and my passion. And by the way, folks, I've got a manuscript here of a book I'm wanting him to publish that tells a lot of those things. So with that, I've said enough. Rush, tell us your story.
Well, people often would ask me when I do events to promote different products, including our own brand, as well as all the other brands that we represent here in Alabama. They would say, wow, how did you get into this?
Yeah.
And I would usually, when there's a line of people all clamoring to get a glass of wine, I would be very succinct and I would say, well, just by chance. Next. And then it occurred to me that over the years of being asked that many times that, you know, maybe I need to develop some sort of story about it, because, you know, just by chance doesn't really reveal anything about the journey that I've had in the wine business for these last 25 years. And so really I just was sort of like a leaf blowing around in a tornado, just blowing with the wind. I had gotten out of college and I didn't know what I wanted to do and had not figured out what I could do to earn a living. And then, you know, as important as what you could do is what do you want to do? And so after going around from job to job, and most all of which were me taking a job selling something, but being in one place all day, every day, selling the same product, either over the phone or, you know, some other method of sales. But it wasn't me going out to my customer. And so after 4 or 5 years of basically spinning my wheels and my family wondering, you know, son, you know, my dad saying, son, what are you gonna do?
Get off the payroll.
And, you know, they even, you know, he questioned my motivation because I just didn't seem to have a direction or something that I was passionate about that I wanted to direct my energies towards. And so it eventually led me to take a job by chance, as I say, with a gentleman who had a startup business, but was really a hobby business.
Okay.
And the goal of this business for this guy was to simply provide himself with a vehicle to write off all of the monies that he spent on collecting wine. And this was primarily French wine.
Sure.
And his
good tax law strategies.
Yeah, I think his wife might have helped motivate him to do that, because she looks at all the money they're spending to go to wine country, and whether it be France or Italy or California or Oregon or wherever they would like to go. And, you know, he was probably, between the wine that he collected for his wine cellar and then the travels and all of that and the meals, you know, he was probably spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 a year.
Yeah.
And
which course, back then was a lot of money.
Well, this is
always a lot of money, but even more so.
This is back in the 90s.
Yeah.
So late 80s, early 90s era, and when he was spending a lot of his take-home dollars, his after-tax income. And so they hatched an idea, the two of them, that he would open an import house so that he would go over and negotiate contracts with wineries in France or California, and then he would bring them into a warehouse in what was Northport, Alabama, so right across the river from Tuscaloosa, and he would then sell the wine outside the state of Alabama, because bigger markets that knew these French wines that he was fond of they would be in New York or Boston or Miami or Chicago or other places like that. So he was working with a broker who was based in Atlanta. So the broker was paid on the front end by these wineries.
Okay.
And the broker would arrange for, 400 or 500 case containers to be shipped over from France to Northport.
Yeah.
And the broker assured the owner that, when the wine gets stateside, I'm going to help you sell it to my contacts in these other larger markets. And the way that Burgundy is sold to an importer is they have many levels of wine, several levels. And you have Bourgogne, which is just Burgundy, and that's the base wine. And then you have Village, which is a little more specific about where the grapes come from, and it's a little more expensive. Okay. And then you have what's called Premier Cru, and that's even more exclusive, and all the grapes come from one actual vineyard site. And then you have what's referred to as Grand Cru, and those are just the best of all the vineyards. And so each level goes up in price and goes down in production. And therefore, scarcity creates demands.
Right.
So the quality and the production level of the Grand Cru wines made those the cherries, and the Premier Crus as well. And so what they do is they structure your purchase based on, let's say, for example, if you want 5 or 10 cases of the Grand Cru, well then you might have to buy 10 or 15 or 20 cases of the Premier Cru, and then you've got to buy 30 or 40 cases of the Village.
To be in the game.
And then maybe 100 or more cases of the Bourgogne.
Yeah.
Because they're not just going to let you cherry pick their best.
Right.
They're going to structure it along that kind of models and mirrors their production level.
Yeah.
And those production levels can vary from vintage to vintage, and do, depending on what Mother Nature gives you to work with. And so when the owner started getting the containers in and wine started stacking up pretty quick, the broker kind of drug his feet on selling the wines out of state. And so when the owner said, hey, I've got bills due and I've got all this money and you've been paid your commission to bring it in, I need help selling it. So that relationship became a little bit strained over the years, and eventually the owner realized he had a lot of wines in a warehouse in Northport, Alabama, that people that drank wine in Alabama in large measure did not understand or demand.
Right.
So he then is realizing, okay, well, I need to go back to the drawing board. So he starts to then focus on selling on the wholesale level within the state of Alabama.
Okay.
That's where I came in.
All right. Sure.
He realized, I don't have the time, I have a day job, I don't have the time to go out, build relationships with wine shop owners and restaurateurs and all these different things. And so I got to find somebody who can do that.
Yeah. And how old were you at this time?
I was 27.
27 years old, and no experience in the wine business.
None.
Yeah.
All I knew is that I liked the taste of wine. That was it.
Yeah. That's good. And showed up for the interview.
That's right. I showed up for the interview, and he and his wife were there at this very small warehouse, about maybe 1,200 square feet or something, with a little office. And he opened a bottle of wine, and he poured some in a glass, and all three of us had our glass, and he said, okay, I want you to smell that wine and taste it, and I just want you to tell me, describe it any way that occurs to you. So he did not prompt me, he did not tell me what he thought of it, he didn't tell me what he smelled or tasted. And his wife, and they sat there,
That's your typical interview process.
And so this was my pass or fail thing. And the thing about wine tasting and wine consumption is I can't tell you what you smell or taste in a wine, because I don't know what you smell or taste. Now, I don't know what I smell or taste. And I've told people this, and they kind of laugh. I say, if you said this smelled like dirty socks, you're not wrong. It doesn't mean I think it smells like dirty socks or someone else does.
That's the way you smell.
But that's how it impressed you. If
So,
that's
so what
it
did
does,
you tell him that day? What did you say?
Well, I smelled the wine, I tasted it. I said, well, I get a little peaches, a little pear, and they're like, okay, you're hired. that was it. And I think
It's a great story.
the important thing to take from that is that if you can smell a wine, taste it, and come up with any description, it doesn't matter if it's accurate or not,
Yeah.
then you have something to work with, and you can develop your taste. You can develop what's referred to as your palate in the wine world, and you have what it takes. All you need to do is gain experience in tasting and smelling different wines.
Right.
And I can't tell you how many people have come to a wine tasting, or I've even talked to outside of a wine tasting, and they've said, "Oh, I could never tell the difference between an $8 bottle or an $800 bottle. I just couldn't do it."
Sure.
And I always would say, "Well, you probably can. You just probably never have had the two side by side to taste them and talk about them with someone who knows what they're tasting and
Sure.
can explain what they are tasting as the difference and why one is worth $800 versus one that costs $8.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that there aren't $8 wines that are
That are
perfectly great to drink any night of the week or with anything.
in your manuscript that I've found totally fascinating. You talk about, I think there was one, I think it may have been the chef and owner of one place just looked at you and like, how long have you been doing this? Because you describe the wine in a way that most people, they don't understand how to do that. And I think that's when you realized you had a really great gift for it as well.
Well, I didn't think of myself in that way. Having him put that and voice that to me, certainly I felt.
Because you hadn't been doing it that long.
No, that was back. I had been in the business 2 or 3 years at that point.
Yeah.
But really, what really got me to where I fine-tuned my ability to sort of a lengthy way describe wine, which you can talk about wine long enough to put everybody to sleep. And so there's a limit as to what people want to hear about what you think.
I just want to drink it. Yeah.
Yeah. But to be able to succinctly describe the wine, because when you get in the wine industry, you're thinking in terms of, okay, I'm tasting the wine because my intent is to determine if this product is going to sell in my market. So you're not just tasting a wine and going, oh, I like that. Mm-hmm. You have to think in terms of, okay, well, how many people are going to like this? That required finding wines that stood up to what was already available.
Right.
And what we tried to do was find things that were even better for the same price.
Sure.
Or better and less expensive. So that when we went to our customer, we gave them more than one reason. Not just, hey, you like me, I'm a nice guy, do me a favor.
Sure.
I never went with my hat in my hand. I never asked for a favor. Okay. I had to bring meaningful value to a partnership.
So, Rush, I have to ask you, because I know you're passionate about wine. You got into this because you enjoyed sipping wine. But also, as you went on this journey, at what point did you go, wow, I have got a business, and it's a serious business. And for me to continue growing it and having income off of it and everything, I've got to do certain things to make it successful. At what point or when did that happen?
Well, I could trace it back to November of 2000.
Okay.
I had been calling this brand over and over again, and they said, look, we don't have enough wine to open a market like Alabama. But when our new vineyards come online and we start making more wine, we'll get back to you. And that wasn't good enough. I kept calling them. So the woman, very nice, Wendy Brooks was her name, at Pride Mountain. She said finally, she's like, hey, Rush. No, nothing's changed. But I tell you what, you're so persistent that there's a big trade show coming up in November of the year 2000, and it's called Family Winemakers. And it's an organization that has hundreds of members, and they're wineries, much like us, small, family-owned brands, high quality, your cup of tea. And so I tell you what we're going to do. We're going to send you a VIP trade pass.
Oh, that's great.
So that you can go and bug them. She didn't say that, but she was thinking that.
Sure.
And then we'll probably never hear from this guy again because he'll be swimming in wine. And so I took her up on the offer, and then I approached the ownership. I said, hey, listen, I've been invited to this trade show, and I want to take over the recruiting of the brands because the owner at the time didn't prioritize recruiting brands like a person on the street. And if you're trying to make a career of something and try to make a business model that can actually be something to make more money,
sure,
you really need to be more aggressive. He said, I tell you what, you can go on this trip, but you're going to have to take vacation time and pay your own way.
Oh.
And so I was like, okay, no problem. So I did, and I went. I had set up, in addition to the trade show, I had set up a handful of appointments with other brands and met with those people and picked up all 5 wineries. And
That's great.
it proved to me that if I got in front of someone, that they would agree to let me represent them most likely,
Sure.
if they had product.
Yeah.
So then I do the trade show. I get, tons of more contacts because it was hundreds of people pouring their wines. And so anyway, so I go back to Alabama and I go into the sales meeting and he's sitting there and he goes, so how'd the trip go? And I was like, oh, it went pretty well. And I handed him all the paperwork, which is allocations, where the winery says you can have 14 cases of this, 14 of that, 7 of that, whatever.
Yeah.
And you have representation rights for Alabama. And so he starts looking at the paper, with his glasses like this, and he's looking at it, he's reading, flipping through, and he's like, okay, Green and Red, Ramey, Minor, Rudd Estate, all Truchard, all these brands that I picked up. And he looks at me and he goes, how'd you do that? And I said, well, I told you what I was going to do, and these people are ready to do business. And he looked at me and he goes, can you do it again? I'll pay for it this time. So I promptly set another trip up in January of '01, went straight back out, and that's when I call the chapter in the little script there, I call it 2001, A Wine Odyssey.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's when
it's a great
just
chapter.
Blew up, because once I had that success on that one trip, all I needed to do was more FaceTime out there, because I had figured out at that point, I knew what they needed to hear, and I knew how to present myself in a way in which they thought, never really thought about Alabama as a place I'd sell my wine, but this guy, he seems to be all right.
He knows what he's doing. Yeah.
And so I was the youngest person in the equation every time.
See, I love to hear that too.
I was.
Because we have a lot of young clients.
Because I was at that point 30. But, and so being in my early 30s, and you've got people in their 50s or whatever they are that own these wineries or whatever. And so that's when it really started, it became a business. I was like, okay, I don't need the owners of that business anymore. All I need is a warehouse and financing. I know the rest.
Well, and that's one reason I wanted you to be on Innovation Mavericks is because, in fact, the competition was already out there. There were bigger players in the market, and you made the decision, I'm going to have my own company, and I'm going to step forward to bring ideas that benefit.
I wanted to represent great people who made great wine at a great price, but it was also a great place to go.
Interesting.
So I wanted to try to bridge the gap, because when I went to California and concentrated my efforts into Napa, Sonoma area, and then even into the Central Coast and further down towards the southern coast, I wanted to take that experience back to Alabama. I wanted people.
That's a great response.
Because when I went out there, it was so intriguing, because out there, wineries sell direct to stores, so the amount of choices and the variety on the store shelves and on the wine list was tremendous. In Alabama at that time, it was largely cookie cutter selections. So if you went in one store, 90% of the wines would be the same as in the next store.
Yeah.
And there would be some variation, and there were a few exceptions to that at the time. But at that point, I was only doing marketing and work in the city of Birmingham, a little in Montgomery, and a tiny amount in Huntsville. But Birmingham was the bulk of everything that I did at that point. But the flurry of activity came where you take your experience, where you go, you recruit the person that has the place and the product that you believe in. And then you bring it to Alabama, but you don't tell the person you met that's a great person with great wine, you don't tell them that, okay, this is great, you're great, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to make these cases go away and you're going to be happy. It was more a partnership of, look, I need for you to come to Alabama.
I've been to those wine tastings, yes.
And I need your help in establishing another layer to the relationship because I'm the person they see every day.
Right.
So I'm not the rock star. I'm here all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So what I need from you is a visit a year, 2 visits a year, especially on the front end. And I want for you to meet them, shake their hand, visit their restaurant or their store, do a bottle signing or a tasting, an event, do promotional work that makes the customer feel important.
Yeah. And a part of it, part of the overall experience. I mean, basically, you've just given our business owners, you got to make it part of the experience and value the relationships and tell the story.
That's right. That's right.
I mean, because I've seen you do that before. I've seen your guests that you have in. I've seen you do that to where you almost feel like you're at their vineyard by the time they finish describing how they pick the grapes and how they make the wine.
That's right. And so that's all part of it.
So what I'm hearing you say, because everybody, I say everybody, people say, I want to own my own business, but in this whole process and all these years, it still comes down to relationships.
That's right.
Hard work. And definitely strategic planning because you got to map out that day.
That's right.
Everything has got to go like
That's right.
clockwork.
Is in the course of doing all that heavy socialization and socialized contact with people, people get naturally fired up and they feel good about the people they met, the sales they made, the work they did.
It's a great experience.
And then over time, of course, there's only so much one person can do, and you have to have help. You have to have other people who can do this model with the same effectiveness that it started with me.
When you started in that minivan.
And so this all started in 2001.
Okay.
That's when it started. Now, the company didn't start till the following year.
No, I understand.
But the model, the flurry of activity, and the way that you can go recruit the brand and get the person to let you have representation rights, then get them to work with you to your customers, that all was fine-tuned in 2001 and then fully implemented in 2002. Yeah. The first half of that year, I worked with my previous company that I talked about before, and that's when everything blew up, is the fine-tuning of the flurry activity of all that I described, and then every week or every other week in the first half of 2002 doing it.
Right.
And then, that's when the
and
sales.
Here we are.
Yeah,
and here we are now.
Yeah.
I need to ask you. I need to ask you one last question. I could have this conversation for hours, but I love entrepreneurial stories. How much did you pay for your Rush Wine logos?
When I left the company I worked for and had developed the flurry of activity business model and how to get wine and how to sell it, I was on an airplane. I was headed out because I had recruited about 40 brands for the previous company by the time that I left. Well, about half of those wanted to be represented by me no matter where I was.
Yeah.
And so they said, look, if you get licensed and you get up and running as a distributor like they are, well then we're going to move the brand to your company. So I had verbal agreements with people previous to actually getting on the ground and opening and being licensed.
Yeah.
So when I went to California on this recruiting trip, I knew that there were some blanks I had to fill in because primarily the brands that I recruited for that company were expensive brands.
Yeah.
They were small production, what they called boutique brands in the wine industry. So these are less than 20,000 case annual production brands. They're usually anywhere between $30 to $150 a bottle or more, and that's how I was able to build sort of, a name for myself locally. Well, when I go to California, knowing that, okay, I'm breaking off from this company and none of the inexpensive brands that they represented were going to move with me. I was going to have to fill that void because you do need everyday wine. Although you make more money when you sell more expensive products because the cost to ship it in, the tax rate, it's all by volume. So a bottle of wine that costs you $8 costs as much to lay into your warehouse and to get it there as a $100 bottle.
Sure.
So it makes more.
People don't realize that.
You make a higher margin by selling more expensive wines.
Yeah.
So anyway, so I go out with the intent to find the $10, $15, $20 selections that would complement what I already had. And so I would go, my common method of recruiting, other than looking at Wine Spectator, Wine Advocate, and other publications that critically taste wine and give them scores and whatnot, I would go to stores in Napa, Sonoma, other parts of California, and say, hey, to the buyer at the store, hey, listen, what is this brand? It would be $10 or $15, and I had never seen it before.
Yeah.
What is this? And they're like, oh, you need to try that. That's really good. As a matter of fact, the guy that makes that is right down the street. And if you want to, I can set you up an appointment because all the people out there sell direct to the customer.
Yeah.
So they're not dealing necessarily with wholesalers as much as they are a lot of times directly with the people.
Okay.
So they know the guy, and so that's how it would happen. And I would have. In one particular case, I picked up a bottle of wine, asked the lady, and she said, yeah, I'll call him right now. He's right down the street. Yeah. And so I went down to talk to this person, and he met me. I walk in the door. He had his samples lined up. He knew what I was there for, and we were ready to taste, and I handed him my little card that I had made up where the actual wine glass, the stem of the glass, and the U that's filled up with a little wine, I had drawn that in. And I hand him the card, and he looks at it, and he said, yeah, have a seat. And I was, okay. And he said, is this your brand? And I said, no, I'm a wholesaler. I want to represent your brand. I don't make wine. Yeah. And he's like, well, you can represent me. That's no problem. We don't. That's a done deal. I can tell by looking at you. And then he said, but I want to talk to you about this. And I said, well, what about it? And he said, well, if you put this on a bottle of wine, it'll sell. I guarantee you.
That's a great story.
So, and I was 31 at the time. I had never thought about making wine or having a brand. And I just asked him, I said, well, why are you so convinced of that? He's like, well, we just got through hiring this company to break down buyer psychology. And we were trying to determine what it is about a label of a product that the average consumer is going to remember and come back to. And so he said that after all the research and all the money they spent, that it was determined that the easiest thing for a person to remember when they see it is a one-syllable, four-letter word. And he said, and this is perfect because not only is it, fit that criteria, but it's also a noun and a verb, and it's used in all sorts of different marketing campaigns, and you have Rush Limbaugh on the radio talking and making headlines with things he says, and there's a rock group, Rush, and you just have all these references, and what's going to happen is they're going to piggyback off familiarity with the word from some other way. Your brand might be brand new, but somebody's going to look at it and go, I've heard of that. I'm familiar with that. And they're going to trust it and buy it.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, that's quite interesting. I'd never heard anything like that. Yeah. And the guy goes, yeah, and as a matter of fact, I want to make it for you. And then I turned to him and I said, hey, well, what would that cost? And these people are in Napa Valley, and they have a lot more zeros in their bank account than I do. Yeah. He said, we could do that for practically nothing. And I'm like, really? Well, how much? About $50,000. I was at the time.
That was a big number.
I had a $42,000 secured line of credit. Yeah. And it was all the money I had access to. And I had to inventory a warehouse. I had to buy computers. I had, I could hire people. I didn't know that at the time, but I would soon have to hire people. So anyway, I was like, well, whoa. I don't have that kind of money. Yeah. And so he said, well, look, I'll tell you what, you save up the money, you can represent my brand and, get going, and then we'll circle back. We'll circle back to it.
That was somebody that understood that there was great talent before him and that there was an opportunity there. So that's great. Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. I mean, I know we're going to get a lot of questions and additional comments. You may have to come back. We may even have to do a good wine tasting series.
Okay.
I'm going to stay after you till you get this printed in book form. So, well, folks, hopefully this has been very beneficial to you. You've gotten great insight on what it takes to be an entrepreneur, to go out and on that journey. I was sitting here thinking about, the name of the book could be Rush, Sipping Wine on My Journey to Success, or something like that. But you've just got this fantastic story, and I really appreciate you sharing it with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Sure. Thank you. Have a great week.